Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. I'm Paul Anderson. I'm in a new role today in that I'm a guest host. I've been on the show any number of times as a guest, but it's a real pleasure for me today because we have here with us today Teresa, can I call you Terry?
You can call me Terry.
Terry Nelson,
yes,
who is the legal director at the ACLU. And we have the new person in charge, John Gordon, who is the new executive director. And I want to get right into it, if I may.
Sure.
We have many viewers out there that approach the ACLU with different perspectives, either good or bad, or don't know who you are or what you do. And both of you, just weigh in. Who are you and what do you do?
Go for it.
So, well, the ACLU's mission is to protect constitutional rights. And here in Minnesota, we do that through programs involving litigation. We represent people in court. We do legislative advocacy. We work through the legislature to pass bills that protect civil liberties. And we do it through education, through educating people about their rights, doing Know Your Rights campaigns, educating about the Constitution.
So it's a very broad-based mandate you have. I mean, you know, I associate with the ACLU going to court, but you do much more than that. Do you appear in the legislature? Do you provide information to the governor?
We do. So we do a lot of our work, we call it integrated advocacy. So it might be doing work in the legislature, but also doing grassroots organizing and bringing people to the legislature to
There's another
have
thing
their
that you
voices
mentioned.
heard.
You say you try to educate citizens. How do you do that?
Well, we have an amazing education director, Gianna Corin, who goes to schools and talks to kids about their rights. She does Know Your Rights programs. We have a Bill of Rights curriculum that we make available to teachers. We have our website that provides a lot of information about rights. John has been going and speaking at various events as well. You talked about voting rights at the League of Women Voters.
We're going to come back to voting rights and some other issues, but John Gordon, who are you? And how does it happen that you are now winding up as the new executive director at the ACLU?
Well, it's a great thrill to be doing this. I practiced law in Minneapolis for a considerable period of time doing litigation, and I've had a variety of clients, but never a client like I have now, which is really the U.S. Constitution, the Minnesota Constitution, our Bill of Rights. So it's a great thrill to be doing this.
Well, I mean, it's a very interesting thing in our society where the people are sovereign. And I mean, when you're talking about the Constitution, I mean, you're really kind of focusing on the people whose rights are embodied in that document.
Right. The ACLU has been doing this work nationally since 1920.
You're almost 100 years old.
Almost 100 years old. Hopefully there'll be a big party at that point.
Yeah. So no, but let's go back in history a little bit. What were the events that caused you to come into being?
The ACLU began in 1920 in connection with the Palmer raids, which was in the midst of a wave of anti-communist hysteria where people were being locked up, the keys thrown away, and deprived of their rights without due process. A group of people, mostly not lawyers, interestingly enough, although there were lawyers involved. It wasn't primarily a law-oriented organization, but more national education and consciousness raising about people's rights that developed, and the ACLU has stayed active through those events, through the McCarthy era, through the civil rights era, and really wherever people's rights have been trampled on.
Okay. But you're primarily a left of center organization, right? Your support comes from one part of the spectrum. Would I be biased or prejudiced or ignorant to say that? I mean, where does your support come from?
You have never been biased or prejudiced or ignorant, to my knowledge, ever. But that's not quite right.
Very nicely put, sir.
Our base of support is very broad. It includes Republicans, it includes Democrats, it includes none of the above. We get a lot of support from a lot of different groups. We represent a lot of different groups. We don't represent just liberals, just Democrats. We represent conservative organizations. We're doing that right now in a case that's now pending in front of the Minnesota Supreme Court. And we have a lot of supporters all over.
Maybe it'll be illustrative. Who's your client? I mean, who are you talking about?
Well, among others, we've filed a friend of the court brief in a case pending in the Minnesota Supreme Court in which we represent a number of organizations who are concerned with preserving the vitality of the Minnesota Constitution, the single subject clause, as it's called, that you're very familiar with.
One of your clients is the Center for the American Experience. There's no way that they would be identified as a liberal group, would they?
That's an organization headed by my old friend John Hinderaker. They are anything but left of center, the center of the American experiment.
But in that same case, we are representing groups like Jewish Community Action. There are groups across the political spectrum in this case. And
so, I mean, this is a myth that I want to, if I can explode it or get to it, is that you're not really ideological in that sense of people in our polarized society would identify you one way or the other.
We are absolutely thoroughly nonpartisan. One of the ways we know that we've been active is when we pick up the newspaper and one or another person is annoyed with us. And I think it's fair to say we've got people annoyed with us from time to time, all the way across the political spectrum, from left to right.
I want to come back to that annoyance question, but Terry.
yes.
You've been with the ACLU in Minnesota for 20-some years.
Yep, 20 years.
Legal counsel, legal director. And when the previous executive director left, you stepped in as the interim executive director, right?
That's right, I did.
So
yes.
now I'm looking at come on, admit it, I'm an older white guy. Is it the old boys network at work here that we now bypass you, a younger female, and put John Gordon in position of power?
So you say bypass me, but in reality, I did agree to serve as interim executive director, but one of the reasons was because I was not interested in pursuing the job, because I love what I do in our legal program, and I am thrilled to no longer be interim executive director.
So there was nothing nefarious going on here?
There was not something nefarious, no, this was not. And John can attest, I think, having been a litigator for many, many years, that there's a lot more to being executive director than being a great lawyer. There is so many other things that go into running the organization. Budgets, finance, all of that just I have no interest in.
You comfortable working with him, John?
I'm going to chime in. Terry has been a delight to work with and for during that period of time. And if I can be permitted to say this, a tremendous constitutional lawyer. I would not want to see her talents and energy anywhere else really, except focused on what she's doing, what she does so well, and what she loves. So it was really a great contribution that she made to the organization by agreeing to serve as interim executive director. And it's been a great pleasure for me to follow in her footsteps.
That's a great question, segue to the question I want to ask before I get back to how annoying you are. Terry, I've seen you at work. I've seen you do it. Where does the passion come from? I mean, you lose more than you win. and it's to keep going and taking these causes. So where does that passion come from?
It can be very frustrating to lose, but you also need to savor those victories when we win. And when we win, it's not just, a win for my wall. This has real impacts on people's lives.
What do you mean by real impact?
I mean, it changes people's lives. It transforms their lives, and it has,
How
for
does it
example,
transform them?
Well, for example, when we file a lawsuit and we are able to, either win an injunction or negotiate a settlement, we get police departments, for example, to change their policies, and so change their policies in ways that will prevent people from being injured in the future, from being unlawfully detained in the future. And so there are real-world impacts for what we do, and they're not just about the individual client, but they're about the entire community.
So,
John, and it is the community, and it is the clients, and it is the Constitution. It's really all three. We had the great privilege not long ago of being able to represent a young Cambodian man, a Cambodian by nationality, who'd never lived in Cambodia, but who the government was trying to remove to Cambodia. They held him in jail for 484 days, not for committing a crime, but simply because they were trying to get him removed from the country. And during that period of time, he was taken away from his family, taken away from his children. And one of the great joys of this was being present at the Bishop Whipple building out at Fort Snelling when he was released and came through the glass doors, and his little daughter and the rest of his kids ran up to him, threw their arms around him.
How did that feel?
Amazing. It was absolutely amazing. He had been in jail for more than a third of his daughter's life at that point, and to see him reunited with his family, and then back in the skilled job that he'd had, which he went back and got the very next day, and started supporting his family again. It was absolutely thrilling.
Now, I mean, this is very interesting. You're not just about issues; you're about people.
We are, yeah.
So, do you? I mean, let me plumb this a little bit deeper. I mean, as you're working on cases, you've talked about, that there are real people who's behind these issues whose lives you're going to affect.
That's exactly right. And so, when you think about, on a nationwide scale, the work that the ACLU is doing, the whole idea is to have an impact on people's lives and an impact on their constitutional rights, and what preventing the government from violating those rights and having a broad impact.
I want to come back to a word or a concept that you brought up earlier. You're annoying. You said that you annoy people. And from the discussion here, I mean, you annoy people across the board. So what's it like to exist and survive in a environment where, bottom line, you do annoy a lot of people? John?
What we do is make sure that people who are powerless, whose rights are being trampled on, have a voice, have somebody in their corner. If all we're doing is making people happy, we are not doing our job. So that's one of the great advantages of being a nonprofit, as we are. So we don't have to turn a profit. We don't have to worry about profits and losses. What we need to worry about is our mission and helping people out, and it's just tremendous.
I'm going to quote Mark Twain here and see if it fits you. Mark Twain said, "A discriminating irreverence is the creator and protector of freedom." Are you discriminatingly irreverent in our society? Or will some people view it that way?
I think certainly people would view it that way, sure. I think we often say that we're equal opportunity offenders and that on any given issue we're going to offend somebody. But I think it's also anybody that I talk to I can find common ground with.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, John Hinderaker, you and he are friends. I mean, he's, I would put you in different, if I were to polarize things, I would put you in different camps. But yet you enter into dialogue and talk with each other.
Very, very different. But there's a lot to talk about. The discussions we have are very lively, shall we say, just like the discussions with you. And I do think one of the things I want to make sure that we come back to is, while litigation is an enormously important part of what we do, we are not just fighting with people all the time. You mentioned it, but I want to make sure it doesn't get lost. We're over at the legislature with our excellent legislative director, Ben Feist, and we have our communications department with Jana Curran and her staff that Terry mentioned, that are going out and making sure that people in schools, people in the community, groups of individuals who want to learn more about the Constitution, who want to preserve the rule of law, all have the tools to work with. So it is not just fighting with people either.
Okay, this is going to, I served on the Supreme Court, and you would, the ACLU would submit a number of amicus briefs in cases. And from my point of view, I always paid attention to that. When the ACLU showed up and weighed in, it was important. So what is the process? I mean, you don't take every case, you get many requests. What is the process you go through to decide that you're going to weigh in and help somebody?
So we have, there are so many constitutional issues. We do have some priority areas. Addressing the racial disparities in our criminal justice system is one of them. Privacy and technology, or individual autonomy is another one. And so we do have some priority areas where we're more likely to get involved. But one of the criteria that we use is, I mentioned impact earlier, is really looking at how is using our resources in this way going to have a positive impact on civil rights, on civil liberties. How is it going to help the most people? Okay. And so that is something. Okay,
this allows me to transition to something. I think it was yesterday the FCC has taken a position that, the term that's used is net neutrality. Mm-hmm. So are you concerned, should we be concerned as a society about the removal of what's been called net neutrality?
We should absolutely be concerned about getting
Why?
rid of net neutrality. Well, some of the viewers to this show are probably streaming online, and if a cable company or an internet company decides, you know what, that John Gordon and Terry Nelson, they're up to no good, or Justice Anderson, they can just kind of cut down the speed.
So if I wanted to access this show, they would have the opportunity to slow it down, so I'd be staring at the screen and seeing this little wheel going on?
Exactly.
Well, who would control that?
So every company. The internet is privatized in this country. It's not like the phone utilities where we've got sort of a government sanctioned monopoly. We have, every individual internet service provider could decide who to slow down and who to speed up. And without the FCC saying, no, you have to treat all internet traffic equally, with a net neutrality rule, then it just comes down to what companies can make the most money off of.
So John, what can we, if you're telling us, Terry, we should be concerned. Is the ACLU going to do anything on this?
The ACLU nationally has been very active in this. If you go to ACLU.org, you can find links that allow you to get in touch with people about that. It is not going well right now. But people should be speaking up about it, and I think can be speaking up about it. The problem is every bit as bad as what Terry said and described it very well. It's also getting worse because when we see combinations between internet service providers and content providers, so that you've got the people making the content but also the people delivering it being the same, they can, the people who are delivering it can favor their own organization over other organizations. And it's just not fair, and it restricts people's ability to understand what's going on in our democracy.
I hate to bring Russia up in this, but that sounds eerily like what Putin did early on in his second term of controlling the media, so people can't have easy access or any access to things that they should be seeing.
Well, and I think, when you look at the way we communicate in this day and age, it is all through the internet. We don't send letters anymore. We don't, very often don't even have phone calls. We do email, we do text, we do, it's just a different mode of communication. And so
I want to send letters, and so often I get the response, just email it, we don't want.
Yeah.
And but I'm going to.
When you can send a letter once in a while, as I do, and people say, "Oh, that's adorable."
So this is a big issue, and we should be concerned about as a society.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to go local for a bit, and I'm just going to throw out a couple of terms or concepts and see whether they're interrelated or not. Okay.
Okay.
Republican National Convention, St. Paul, 2008. Super Bowl, Minneapolis, 2018. Is there any similarity between the two, or just because I know you were involved in the rights on the convention in 2008? Should we be looking at some similarities, or how are they different?
I think there's both. I think there are similarities and there's differences. Similarities are that both the RNC convention and the Super Bowl are considered national security events. And so you're going to have...
That's a legitimate concern, is it?
Yeah, and so you're going to have the federal government coming in and talking about security plans, and you're going to have a much higher level of security than even an average football game. And so we're going to be seeing the impact of those security plans in downtown Minneapolis during the Super Bowl. I've heard about the National Guard, having a presence in full military gear, maybe some Humvees, which is disconcerting to me. But I think the differences are that with the Republican National Convention, we were seeing a nationwide mobilization of people coming to the Twin Cities to demonstrate. And, there will be protests, there will be demonstrations during the Super Bowl, certainly, but I don't think we're going to see that same kind of mobilization.
So what worries you about, John? Do you have any concerns? Are you paying attention to what's happening in the Super Bowl?
Absolutely. We have every aspect of this organization with eyes on different parts of this. Teresa got it right that we are concerned around the Super Bowl time and more generally with the militarization of our police and the militarization of law enforcement. We're getting away from the notion that police are part of the community and in some places turning into more of an occupying force. That's a huge problem. We are also concerned with people's free speech rights being trampled upon because there is this notion that we're here for a sporting event and we don't want to be troubled with the problems of the real world. And the fact is people have got a right to make their voices heard. And we want to make sure that that's protected. And then there are these privacy issues that Terry mentioned. And it's hard to know what's really going on there because so much of it's classified, and it's hard to know what's going to happen once they get started with all these measures. You quote Mark Twain, I quote Yogi Berra. He said, predictions are so difficult, especially about the future.
Okay, but I'm going to come back to this. All I want to do is enjoy the Super Bowl and make Minnesota a showplace, whatever. It sounds to me what you're talking about is kind of annoying.
Well, you know what? Democracy isn't always pretty. And our Constitution has a First Amendment that protects people's right to speak. And it's large-scale events like the Super Bowl, like the RNC convention, where you do have big crowds, that is the most critical to get your message out. Another area where we're concerned is in how police deal with homelessness. What we've seen in other cities is a tendency to kind of clear homeless people out of the area so that wealthy people attending the Super Bowl don't have to see the fact that there are homeless people.
Well, John, I know you're anxious to weigh in, but we got fewer than 5 minutes, and both of you have talked about the police. Mm-hmm. And you talked about, occupying force, kind of like what happened in Ferguson. I've noticed that we know society is becoming more polarized, and to a certain extent, law enforcement, first responders are tending to be either pushed or voluntarily become more polarizing and come to one side. My question is that true, and how can we prevent this from happening? Because, one of the key, you talk about the Constitution, one of the key guarantees of the Constitution is to provide public safety so we can enjoy our rights. So how do we balance this?
Well, there are lots of police officers, prosecutors, judges who work real hard all day long to get it right. And those people need to be supported and not silenced. That's the first thing, because there needs to be exposure, and people need to know what's going on, and we can't have people hiding things when people who are trying to do the right thing and trying to do their jobs are really trying to get the word out. So that's the main thing.
Transparency is
transparency.
Okay. But what else can we do?
I think the other thing we can do is to understand that, for example, in terms of protests, that really isn't something that's antithetical to what's going on. We've got sporting events, and patriotism and the flag are a big part of it. But the fact is that dissent and differing voices are every bit as patriotic as anything else that's going on.
So it's patriotic to speak up and to express your views in our society?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to give you a chance to say what you want at the end, but is your support increasing or decreasing in light of the current national environment in our country?
We have seen an unprecedented level of support.
What do you
It
mean
is substantially increasing. So our membership here in Minnesota went from about 8,000 people to around 30,000.
Well, why
our
is that?
members, I think people were, with the election, recognized that this new administration poses serious threats to our constitutional rights, and the ACLU is one of the premier organizations that works to protect those rights.
John, did you have a feeling that people were taking you for granted and their liberties for granted, and now they're changing their consciousness?
I think the environment is very different now. People are scared. We can see it in people's faces. We can read it. It is a different kind of environment when you've got an administration and a Department of Justice that has undertaken to divide people, to demonize people based on their race, nationality, immigration status. People's attitudes are very different right now. And that has resulted in a huge amount of support for us, which we are very gratified about. The fact that that we're taping this program towards the end of the year, and people thinking about how to make year-end contributions.
Well, you can't make a pitch, but you survive on private donations, don't you?
We do.
We do.
Now, we're under 30 seconds. Is there any last word in 15, 20 seconds you'd want to leave with the audience?
I'll leave that to you.
Okay. What a pleasure it is, and how proud we are to have not just a national organization, but a Minnesota organization devoted to the protection of people's civil liberties.
Like many other aspects, the nation looks to Minnesota for leadership, and they see some of that leadership coming from the Minnesota ACLU.
We are working very hard, and the entire staff is working very hard to do just that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and protect our rights under the Constitution.
We'll do our best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.